is. Hey, folks, welcome back to the Land Fixer podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Logan Swanson. Today, recording not from my studio, which is actually my bedroom, but recording from a hotel here out beautiful Hot Springs, Arkansas. So, audio quality might be a little lower, but I think the content will make up for it. Remember, folks, if you need funding for any of your land deals, if you need funding for a subdivision or a development project, as long as we're not going vertical, I'm your guy. Happy to reach out to you. Just check out www.landpartnerfunding.com or email me at thelandfixer@gmail.com. And we can get together and see if your project is a good fit for us. But today we have Joshua Kagan. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Logan. Great to be here. Thank you
Yeah,
for having
really.
me.
Yeah, really glad to have you. When we scheduled this, I didn't realize it was a holiday, so I appreciate you still coming on.
All
Uh,
good.
but
Kiddos in camp, so I don't have to be
okay,
daddy daycare today. So all good.
sweet. Well, the audience can be interested in who you are and what you're doing. So if you give us a little bit, bring us up to speed, and then I have some great questions for you as well.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Joshua Kagan. I spent 15 years of my career in commercial and residential real estate, done a bunch of fix and flips, tear down rebuilds, started a platform called Bonfire.capital, and then transitioned to land a couple years ago. First started out with the Desert Squares and then started kind of doing bigger projects. Started something called smartlandinvestors.com, which is all free content to help kind of first time investors hopefully learn, not make the mistakes that I've made throughout my career. It's sort of a compendium of everything I've done in my real estate career and all the mistakes I made. So yeah, it's kind of a free email course and a bunch of other free goodies. There's no sort of like coaching involved with it. It's just all free content.
Now, why would you ever do anything and not expect a bunch of money at the end?
I know it sounds contrary, but I've had so many wonderful mentors and people who have paid it forward to me and just helped me along my path that it just feels like the right thing to do. Especially because I sell land and I sell to people who are like, oh, great, I want to buy it. I want to put my RV, for instance, on the property. I'm like, whoa, you need to look up the zoning.
Hmm.
You actually, in this part of Arizona, you can't put an RV on it. And people are shocked, right? So there's so much misconceptions out there that I feel like we owe it to people to clarify.
Hmm. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and when we first met, and actually that's kind of where I was thinking to start. Is you called me a little while ago interested in finding a funding partner. And I thought it'd be a cool perspective to get into here because you asked all the right questions when you were kind of interviewing me to see if we were a good fit there. But when people come to me interested in funding, oftentimes they're just looking to see what our rates are or how quickly we can turn things around. And those are some of the common questions. But what I really liked is you were asking, like, okay, if this were to be a long-term relationship, can you be accountable in this way, this way, and this way? And I thought that was so smart because before I started a funding company, I was on your side of the table. I was always going out and trying to find
Mhm.
funding. And I worked with people that weren't great. I worked with people that took way too much of the deal and kind of kept me always poor. So let's kind of like review that a little bit. What were you really looking for when you wanted to work with someone for funding?
Yeah. Let me back up. So, I closed 55 land deals last year. And coming out of Bonfire, which is a venture backed company, when we got really hit hard by interest rates doubling in 2022 and just a number of different things that I've been kind of scarred from that experience. I have like really good friends who have invested in Bonfire. It's been very stressful having investors. So I've funded smart land investors myself, which we have a sister company called Friendly Acres Land, which is our acquisition side. Smart land investors is our sort of media content side, disposition side of things. So we've just funded things, my wife and I ourselves, and I've kind of wanted to move beyond the Desert Squares and start scaling up. And I've realized that we were kind of victims of our own success, and we're going to tap out of our balance sheet towards the end of this year. And so for me, I don't want to have a lot of funding partners. I only want, frankly, two. And and I'm going to come visit you in a couple weeks or in the next month in Dallas. And the other individual lives in Southern California. And I just went to LA and we went on a hike together and it was an amazing connection. For me,
Drew?
Drew, love
Yeah,
Drew.
hell yeah. Drew's
Drew's the
awesome.
man. Drew's
Yeah.
awesome. He's the man. Yep. First time ever meeting him, we went on a 2-hour hike, north of LA, and it was amazing. And it's like for me, this is partnership is long-standing relationships, you know, and I'm very
Hmm.
blessed that a lot of my best friends, I've known them since elementary school, high school, college, grad school, like, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I'm
Yeah.
kind of dating myself. And so, you know, I think it's really important to have alignment with people because inevitably things can go, there can be situations that arise that we didn't intend for, right?
Hmm.
Something happened, like a property takes longer to sell or the market turns. And being able to have really clear communication and clarity on expectations and just is so important to me because having a bad partner, you know, you hear about those stories of people suing each other and hate. I've never
Yeah.
had that. You know, and I don't want to have that. So if we can invest in the relationship up front and see that there's simpatico, then hopefully we can avoid that stuff later, right? And I feel like when people approach relationships from a relational perspective rather than transactional, you create the space to have questions like I asked you, Logan. I was like, what is your why? Right?
Yeah.
Where does this fit into your bigger business? Or the story of your life? Like, how does this fit in? You know, because I want to see if there's alignment. And it's totally cool if there isn't, right? It's better to kind of figure that out up front than
100%.
later down the line, right? You know what I mean? And when you started talking about your, you know, your passion for service, I was like, this is a brother from another mother, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to get into next. And I do want to hear about your land business and everything as well. But
Mm.
when it comes to the why of the industry or the why of the business or what keeps people motivated and moving each day, I find that so important. And I try to ask every client that comes to me, like, what is their main motivation? Because typically, if it's just money, those aren't the folks that will stick with you, right? So if you say I fund somebody's deal and they're just hoping to make a little bit of cash at the end of it, like they usually have no problem disappearing into the night if the property defaults or something like that. They're not usually concerned about their image or the longevity of their company. So I much prefer to work with somebody who has some greater purpose. And, we really align because I'm a big service guy. I love really trying to build other people up around me, give away what was freely given to me for the most part. Like most of the valuable information I have, I didn't, pay an attorney to give it to me or anything like that. I
Mhm.
did pay for a guru at one point, a couple grand, and they did give me some good foundational information, but that's not what's made my career. So, yeah, that feeling of like, okay, if I can work with somebody who's also motivated to help other people, not only do I feel more confident in them just in a one deal by deal basis, but also like this community of land investors is pretty tight. You mentioned hiking in LA. I know who you're fucking talking about, right? So,
Mhm.
what I'm really looking for as well when I bring in a new client or really a new partner into our operations is it the sort of person that I can take bigger and bigger deals with? Like we also
Mm.
find deals, and I don't really want to be the operator of a deal. So if we find a deal in house, I would still want to go into my network and be like, does anyone want to JV on this and be the operator? Things like that. So I just think there's so much more opportunity for mutual growth as well as the reduced headache of like, are we just going to sit someday and stare at each other with lawyers in the room suing each other or something stupid like that? So that was that's a huge bonus for me. I really admire that. I really admire people who freely give. I think it's so rare in our industry. Most people freely give, but then there's something they're waiting to take from you behind or sell
Mm.
you after or whatever. And
Mm.
that's, you know, it's it's such a challenge in terms of like viewing humans as humans when there's that sort of money arrangement always baked into it. So
Yeah, yeah.
kudos to you on that. I 100% agree that that's the path to take.
Well, and I think it comes down to asking people what their why is. For you know, there's a lot of folks, and I'll come to sort of where I've gotten to in terms of wanting to be of service i- in a second, because I think like you know there's a lot of folks who are really struggling right now financially, you know, and they're figuring out where they're going to make their next payment, or maybe they have a spouse who's sick and they have medical debt or student debt, right? And so, you know, I totally respect if people are like, I just need to make money right now. Like that's where they're at. Like totally cool, right? You know, I feel very blessed to be in a financial position where I can ask myself, you know, what do I want out of life other than just being, you know, making more
Right.
money? And it's just, you know, it's a place of privilege in a lot of ways. we created Bonfire. With our goal with it was to enable everyday people to have access to commercial real estate, right? Why? Because look at, in our country, we have these rules around accredited investors.
Mm,
I'm going to say that basically you have to have $300,000 of salary or $1 million net worth outside of your house to be able to invest in institutional real estate, venture capital, or private equity, right? So what happens? The rich get richer, and 90% of the population aren't even able to invest in these asset classes that have gone through the roof over the last several decades, right? But anyway, that's a whole other topic. But we created Bonfire as a way to enable everyday people to invest in commercial real estate. And one of the sort of highlights of my career was like when we launched our minimum viable product. It was this asset in North Carolina, and we had people just writing to us being like, "I'm a cab driver in Jaipur, India, and I now own a piece of real estate in the US of A," right? And just enabling people to have access to assets because why? We all have, people have their salaries, that's great, but the way people build wealth is through asset accumulation. And I saw with land, there's this opportunity to help people get off of just the treadmill of renting and
mhm.
not owning assets and actually tangibly be able to own an asset at a much lower price point who don't typically qualify for seller financing,
Yep.
right? And so we have this amazing ability to help folks and give them hope to actually own assets that if they buy correctly, are going to appreciate over time significantly and learn the power of compound, growth, right? And that's kind of where smart land investors comes in is I want to teach people at least what I think of smart land investors, and maybe other people have different opinions, which is totally fine, but at least like how not to make mistakes. You know, thinking that you're buying a piece of property and it's landlocked, or there's no legal access, or the slope is so steep that no one's ever going to buy it again, right? Or the mineral rights have been sold away, or titles clouded, right? Like, all these things that I've made mistakes on in my career. My hope is that other people don't have to make them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like having informed buyers is the key to repeat buyers. I don't think a lot of people know this, but like you can definitely have repeat buyers in areas. I mean, I have a guy who calls me regularly and just wants to know what cool land projects I
Yeah.
have because he's like me. He's bought into the asset. He loves the asset. He loves the affordability. He loves, not having to worry about it being mowed or, there's zero maintenance to it. And they're like little toys for him. Like he likes to go out wherever he buys the property and go hang out on. So it's like, but I wouldn't have that relationship with him if I wasn't educating him along the way on exactly, what you can do on this property, what you can't do on this property, maybe why this isn't the best property to build a house on because of X, Y, or Z challenges with the lot, grading, whatever.
100%. And I think when we get into relationships with folks, and I don't know if you've done seller financing in your business or
Oh yeah,
not.
lots.
So for me, if I'm providing seller financing, I'm entering potentially a 10-year relationship with someone, right? So
Hmm.
I want them to be psyched. Like I want them to be stoked about this piece of land. So I'll tell them all the reasons why they shouldn't buy it. Like, oh, you're planning on building, like manufactured housing, but this county is never gonna, or this city, you're under city zoning codes, not the county, and they're never going to allow it, right? Like, trying to talk people out of, or I really want them to be like all in on it because then I don't want them to come back in a month or two and be like, "Oh, I thought I could do this thing for it." I don't want, you know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
it's entering a long term relationship. I find that people have a lot of skepticism around that. They think, "Oh, I met you on Facebook or something. What are you trying to scam me?" And so, to your point, I'm extremely grateful the number of repeat customers I have who say, "If you have something in this area, let me know first." Yeah, there's not always a match in terms of, like, having the right inventory for where they're looking, but, I probably third of my sales have been f to repeat buyers.
Wow, that's pretty good. Yeah, I think I couldn't claim a third, but a good number. Well, beautiful. So let's kind of get into your land business a little bit. I mean, people are always looking to try to learn and finesse, and luckily they can go learn, right, for free on your website, smartlandinvesting.com, right? I got that right?
Smart land investors, yeah, smart land investors.
Smartlandinvestors.com. Okay.
Yeah.
And you're no newbie to the game, so what you said you started out in Desert Squares. What does
I
your
did.
business look like these days from where it started?
Yeah, I mean, Desert Squares have treated me well. for anyone who thinks that that market is dead, it's not. There's still demand. People are still moving to different states and different counties, and I always recommend checking out the U-Haul guide. It's
Mhm.
published once a year, and it has stats on the 10 best performing and worst performing states in terms of where people are taking one-way U-Haul rides. It's like off of 2.5 million data points or something. And they also show the counties where people are moving. That to me, that's a leading indicator because census data is a lagging indicator.
Yes.
So, I look at and you'll see that people are still moving to places where there's desert squares. Um, One thing that I'm learning in this business that I didn't appreciate before is how important, how quickly the market moves and how different the market is right now, than 6 months ago compared to even a
Hmm.
year ago. And just things are shifting and stuff is taking longer to sell. I'm seeing that
Yep.
across the board.
Yep.
So it becomes really important to look at demand indicators like STR, strike through rate, excuse me, which to folks who don't know what that is, the ratio between what has sold over the last year versus what's on the market. Ideally, we want it above 1.0 or
Hmm.
100%. I look at days on market. I look at number of counts related to a specific acreage range and just trying to look at sort of 6 month data, not just 1 year. And I know folks back in the day could look at 2 year data.
No.
And I think that's pretty stale at this point.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge, especially when people are bringing deals to us for underwriting, and they're supplying year-old comps or 2-year-old comps, and I'm just like, that's just invalid data at this point. I mean, the market's moving too fast, and it is a big challenge for us, especially in rural areas where maybe there aren't a lot of transactions, right? There's not a lot of on-market properties for us to look at. And when you're in that situation, you just have to go hyper conservative. Like if you don't
Yeah.
have a lot of comps to give you a clear image, that's your only
Yeah.
option. Go hyper conservative. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's interesting. So you're you were talking about selecting new areas, right? You said strike through rate. We typically refer to that as absorption rate in our
Mhm.
business. Is that the same stat?
One data platform I use, Landstats, folks know,
Landstats? Okay, I've never
has
used that.
has different has absorption rate is different than strike through rate. And I don't
Okay.
remember how they do absorption rate, but it's based. I don't want to mislead folks if they're used to absorption rate from Landstats because it's a
Mm,
different number than strike through rate, but it basically is a proxy of absorption, right?
right.
So I'll never target a market that has really bad absorption.
Hmm.
I just won't, and it's likely to sit on the market a long time.
Right.
Um, I want to
Unless
know
you're
that
at
people.
like zero, like the lowest pricing, right? That's maybe your one option there.
Right. Yeah, it could be. But I would want to know why is demand so low in that area?
Hmm.
Right? What's going on there? So I try to talk to agents in local markets in any market that I'm going to buy in. I try to talk to folks on the ground. Ideally, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd go drive there and visit it and just kind of see. I just did that. I was just in northern Arizona driving around and just seeing the various different counties that I've closed properties on, and it was fascinating to really see granularly, and walk the land and just understand it better. I mean, it's not scalable, but it's helpful if one can do it.
Yeah, it is funny, right? You're used to just looking at GIS maps and all this sort of stuff. And I've set foot on maybe, so the subdivision projects I've done, I've gone to most of them.
Hmm.
But the individual flips, I've stepped foot on so few of them that it's like, it almost seems intangible. That's one of the sketchy things
Yeah.
about doing funding, especially when you're getting deals brought to you from all over the country and different
Right.
areas.
Yeah.
You try to just look at it as a 2D thing. I mean, yeah, you might look at a topo map, but like you're not getting the essence of the area or the characters, and that's when you have to rely on agents and brokers and local
Yeah.
guys. I 100% agree with that. And in fact, what I've advised folks is like spend more time on market selection and data aggregation and purification before you go to marketing. Like you need to have that stuff
Sure.
really well dialed in. Otherwise, you can spend a lot of money and effort bringing in a bunch of deals you'll never buy, don't fit your buy box, or too hairy.
Oh,
And and worse, what if you buy one in a market that it's not going to move? Like every, 3, 4 months, I'll post around in some Facebook groups and I'll offer to do these like just free 15-minute phone calls with anybody, if I can be of service and help them to maybe get through a land related problem or ask some sort of questions about their land business. And what I found over and over again was like so many people fall into this plight where they don't do much market research. They send out a bunch of, acquisition marketing. They get a low response rate. The one or two property sellers that they do get responses from, they feel compelled to make the purchase, right? They already spent all this time and energy and money up funnel, and then
Right.
finally they're staring at their option to maybe buy one or two properties, and they feel like if they don't buy a property, they wasted all their time and money. And then they buy a property that isn't worth what they think it's worth. It doesn't sell the way they think it's going to sell. And then all their money, if you start with 30 grand, that's like 5 or 10 grand in marketing and then 20 grand in a land purchase. And that's all your money. So then you just have to sit there and watch a property that you can't sell. And most of the time they bought it too high. So they can only slash prices so far without losing
Yeah.
money.
It's
Um,
a really important point, Logan. It really is. Like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off if you
no,
were
that's great.
like, there's a couple things that I want to sort of address on that. One is the importance, like I found when I looked back on 2025, I had a 1% response rate, which on the one hand will sound pretty good, right? But I was looking through it, and about 30 to 40% of it were people who said yes, yes, I want to buy it. I want you to, I'll sell it to you. And I didn't want to buy it,
Yep.
right? Because I didn't appreciate the slope. I didn't appreciate that it was in an HOA. I didn't do my upfront homework to see that it
Mhm.
was in a flood zone. And all the so it created so much drag on my business having to field calls, doing due diligence on projects that I walked away from. Right? It's
Yep.
a terrible use of my time. It's a terrible use of their time. By the way, they get excited about getting a letter and then I have to say, sorry, it doesn't fit my criteria. Like that's not a good look either. Totally. So it's like if I had done a better job up front of like really nailing my criteria and screening, I wouldn't have had that. The second piece is around, I think a lot of I learned the hard way about what A/B testing is and the importance of it, but the importance of doing it right. And so for me, like at this point in my career with land, it's like we are tracking everything. But when we put out mailers, we are making sure that if we're doing A/B testing, and if folks who know might not know what that is, it's basically like you put out a mailer and you try two different things. You try
Yep.
like a different subject line, but you only do it on one thing. But if you A/B test price and do you put this the font and all, you don't know which one is actually delivering the benefit or which one's performing better.
Too many
So
variables to control for. Yeah.
100%. So what I'd really recommend to folks is having a clear criteria or hypothesis ahead of time and say, okay, let's say I'm going to price this mailer. A is going to be at 50% of market. B is going to be at 60, whatever that is. And
Hmm.
really demarcating it on their, whatever they're using, a spreadsheet or some sort of CRM so that they know which one is performed, and to start really getting into like building the muscle of testing every time with every form of marketing and then just doing more of what's working.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
you have to be a little more sophisticated to survive, right? I've interviewed a lot of people. I speak to investors all the time, and the consensus I'm hearing right now is most people are spending between $5,000 and $10,000 in marketing per deal acquired. And if you're breaking that down into text messages and letters going out, I mean, that is a whole lot of work that's being done to just to secure a single deal. And the only way to fine tune that is to be smarter. Like the only way to fine tune that is to have better lists, better data, better offer prices, whatever. So it's, super wise to put more effort in on the front end and reap the rewards. Cause like you were saying, it's not just you're sending out mail, but there's this whole acquisition process that has to take effect. So now you're dealing with the phone calls on properties you'd never want to buy. Now you're trying to negotiate offers down because or whatever, like you're going through so
right,
much headache dealing with properties that you probably won't end up buying. And in the early stages of investing, I think a lot of people, I mean, myself included, I'll just have to speak for myself. I always confuse movement with progress.
right,
So I would be very busy every day. I'm like, oh, I'm talking to sellers, I'm doing all this. And if I was describing it to somebody else, I'm sure it sounded like great. Like, oh, I'm always dealing with selling. But when you look back at it, you're like, if you're not doing deals, you're not doing it right. So
Mhm.
if you don't
Mhm.
have that stuff dialed in, yes, you can be having a lot of movement, but that movement does not always result in progress. It doesn't result in dollars in the bank. And that's, ultimately, if you're
That's
not
why
doing that,
KPIs are so important, right, Logan?
yeah.
Right? To make sure that we're measuring what we're doing, right? Otherwise, we could, to your point, we could confuse movement with progress,
Mhm. Yep.
right? And just making sure that we have the right KPIs and not too many. I mean, I think that's the mistake people make where they track everything and therefore they're tracking. It's hard. They lose sight of what's actually important, what's actually moving the needle of our business. You know,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. I've been turned on to this concept of the WIG, the wildly important goal. It's from this book called The Four Principles of Execution, and I
Hmm.
love it. It's like this one question of like, if there was one thing in your business that if you could pull a lever, it would transform your business, what would that be? Now, a lot of people make the mistake of saying, "Oh, I would do $1 million next year, 100,000, whatever that is,"
Yeah.
but that's not in your control. The WIG is that thing, that lever that if you did that thing, you're more likely to succeed. So for me last year, it was putting out, 40,000 pieces of mail. I figured that that would lead to 400 responses and 40 deals.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, and so I tracked every single week, every single month. Am I on track? Right. And I just think, everyone needs to figure out for their own business, what is that really important metric? And what are the sort of sub steps that they can track to meet that? I don't know. That's just the way that it works. I'm also dyslexic. So like what works for me probably doesn't work for other people, you know?
No, interesting. I mean, that's exactly what I suggest. I mean, like, what's the 7 habits of highly effective people, right? First thing is start with the end in mind. And that means you have to
Mm,
outlay all of the necessary steps to get to your goal. And yeah, I agree. I've heard of people doing both, right? Not tracking any KPIs. I've been guilty of that. Or tracking way too many. I've been guilty of that. And really, it's like in the acquisitions game, it's like how much mail are you sending? What's your response rate? What are you closing on? And really, if you're then you get all the way to the sales cycle, what's your rate of return? I mean, that's mostly it. Those are the four things
yeah.
that you really need to document, but you have to document them clearly. And I think the biggest mistake is when you get confused with the numbers on acquisitions. Like,
Mm,
it's not just
mm,
what you bought the property for and what you sold it for. You have to account for all the marketing that leads up to that deal. Otherwise, I've heard of people that are bringing me. I've had people bring me deals where like they want me to fund a $5,000 acquisition and sell it for $10,000. And I'm like, there's no way. Like, I wouldn't make enough money doing that even if we were doing like a heavy profit share my direction. And you're surely not making any money doing that
right.
because
Right.
you had to spend 4 grand just to get this deal, and you're going to make 2 grand. It's like you need to step back and look at your
Yeah.
business. But anyway, so you've done a lot of flipping, but recently you're doing more of the subdivisions, correct?
I'm moving in that direction for sure. Yeah, doing taking down bigger parcels and chopping them up. I mean, there's just such a compelling arbitrage when it can be done. I'm learning also though that yeah, you have to really really pick markets well. On the the sellers are more sophisticated than they were before. I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm noticing when I say so I, what I'm noticing is true, and that is more and more sellers are saying, "Oh, you're the fifth mailer I've gotten this month," right? Whether
Yep.
they're actually being true about that, I don't know, but it seems like sellers are getting more sophisticated to some degree. The subdivisions are tricky because you have to make sure that cold whether the county's going to approve a minor subdivision or not. No, versus like you have to know the process because I'll give you an example of something. I looked at something that was in a county that allows for very easy subdivisions on
Hmm.
paper. If it's 40, you could chop them into 10. But I actually, if you look at the fine print, it has to be 40.1 or something because it has to, each of them have to be a little bit over 10,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, and I kind of, in transparency, I learned it the hard way. And this one, we turned them into a 20, a 10, and a 10. And I'm going to end up doing phenomenally on it. I happen to have gotten lucky that happens to be in a county where there's a lot of demand for 20s and not a lot of supply. So it's going
Yeah.
to be fine. But it's like that could have been catastrophic if the business model was like, oh, it has to work to have them be each 10. And then I learned that I couldn't do 10, right? So it just goes to your point earlier, Logan. It's like, go slow, like there's some wisdom about actually going slower and like taking the time to really understand the intricacies of a market and maybe picking less markets but going deep with them versus my insecurities that I had when I started this business of like I don't know where it's going to work. I got to be everywhere and just like just
Yep.
machine gunned like mailers all over the country.
Yep.
And then it was like, okay, I have a deal in Pennsylvania, I have a deal in upstate New York, I have a deal in Nevada. Like, oh my God, I didn't realize that like in North Carolina, you have to go through a law firm and that's going to cost 2 grand. I thought that was going to be, $400
Yep.
closing fees. And like, I didn't realize in Pennsylvania, you really have to do a perk test, but that's not
Yep.
going to work on a $2,000 per, you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
all these sort of intricacies of nuances of trying to be this sort of scatter plat approach versus just picking a handful of markets. And that's what I'm thinking with like subdivisions is like just go really deep with just a handful of markets is kind of my approach right now.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. That sounds our careers run very similarly. I remember I had just straight ego told me like I want to own land in every state in America.
Mhm,
So then I just
mhm.
started just shooting mail everywhere. And I remember one of the most expensive lessons I learned was I was using data tree at the time and just
Yeah.
mass importing data, and not really
Yeah.
using a lot of filters. I'm like, I'm just gonna mail the whole fucking county. Surely I'll make some money.
Uh,
And I mailed all of Siskiyou County, California, Northern California,
yeah.
and the data tree information, the decimal point was off on the acreage. So I thought I was
Mm,
sending offers for 1 acre lots,
mm.
but they were 0.1 acre lots.
Wow.
So the entire mailer was trash. And everybody was calling me because everybody
Right.
was happy to take a 10x
Right.
offer on their property. So I
Right.
just sat there and I got beat up for weeks and weeks of people
Oh,
calling.
it's
"Oh,
the
I'd love to
worst.
sell you this property." And I sent those, they're like contracts so people could just sign the offer and send it back to me.
Right.
So I remember like
Right.
a week after the mail landed, I checked my mailbox and there was like a stack this big of accepted offers. And like usually you'd be excited, but I was like, oh,
Right.
fuck, no, this is
It's
not.
so funny. Oh my God, it's the worst feeling. It's the
Yep.
worst feeling.
Yep, and I felt so
Yep.
compelled to not waste the mailer that I did what I shouldn't have done. I should have just took the kick in the teeth. It was 22,000 pieces or something like that.
Wow.
So I spent it was
Yeah.
like 10 grand I dropped in like a
Right.
day, not thinking.
Right.
So I ended up negotiating hard with a few people and I did end up buying 3 lots and I was so proud of
Wow.
myself. I was like, I got 3 lots. I'm not going to waste this mailer. But there were these 3 lots around this lake called Lake Shastina.
Okay.
And on the Google Earth, it looked beautiful. They were like lake lots. I'd done
Right.
tons of lake lots everywhere. I was like, this will be a breeze. I was buying them for like 1,000 or 1,500 bucks. I was like, these are worth 15 grand easy, no problem all day.
Right.
And then I bring them to market, and it turns out that like the lake dried up. So it was
Oh
just like a
no.
giant crater community, and nobody wanted to fucking build there.
Oh my God. That is so funny. Right? You see it on Google Earth. It's from a few years ago, this beautiful lake, and then it's a fucking crater.
Yep.
Wow.
Oh man, it sucks.
It's the worst feeling, man.
I think they're all sold now, but it took like 3 or 4 years to sell those, and I lost
Dude,
money.
Dude, when I started with data tree and I don't use them anymore, it was like I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, I was sending shit out to like corporations,
Yep.
and maybe other folks have had success, but like, like Pioneer Title or whatever as the owner of the property, or like Equity Trust, or like,
Yep.
whatever, like Cattle Corp or whatever. And like, yeah, I had no response. It was just, yeah. And then I would also like there was a button where you could like not send it to duplicates. Like I'm sending duplicates, just
Yep.
total waste. So probably 50% of the mail was like complete waste.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was kind of okay for a while when you were still sending mail to people for the first time.
Right.
Sometimes, you'd still get deals that way, but you just can't play with that
Right.
level of slop anymore. But on your subdivisions, are you doing improvements, like running roads and
Not
things like that, or just
roads, yes.
just
So
okay?
so yeah. So like one that comes to mind is like we excavated there's a main road and we excavated a dirt road for one of the parcels. And it was like 3 grand, obviously survey costs, but we're not doing anything vertical. I just want to keep it simple, minor subdivision. I don't have to deal with county hearings and change of use and all that stuff. Just want to keep it really simple for now,
Sure.
at least.
And in these markets, like one of the questions that I have with people recently, and we're looking at it internally too for these lots that are sitting. is, is it better to do more of, say, the infrastructure improvements, like getting a perk test and maybe even dropping a well on properties, clearing a home site, things of that nature? Do you think it's worth that to get properties moved in a good timeline, or are you really just looking like, I'm just going to make it more affordable? Like, what's your move there to keep things from rotting on market?
I would just always have data informant. Every single property is going to have its own specific characteristics and specific market. Agents in market will know whether the risk reward is worth it in terms of putting in a well or doing a perk or septic. I mean, if if it's a place where you're questioning whether it's going to perk to begin with, I would do the perk up front. In fact, I'm doing that right now on a
Yeah.
property. I'm paying 3,000 out of pocket to perk it. It happens to be an area right now that has a lot of snow, so they haven't been able to go out there.
Yeah.
But it would radically reduce my ability to sell it if it doesn't perk,
Hmm.
right? So I think it's a matter of speaking to a local agent and understand who oftentimes knows the buyer, knows the market better, and if they're honest, and not every agent is honest, but I've found most are the ones at least I've interacted with. They'll be honest and they'll say, yeah, it could move, it could help it move, but to spend 10 grand on a well, you're only going to get 5,000 that back. I think it's very specific, but I like how you're thinking, Logan, about like, okay, if something is just sitting there, we as investors shouldn't just accept that it's going to stay there forever. What can we be doing to add value to it? And that's one of the things that I do, I guess, with my properties I sell with agents, I also co-market it with them. And now if a lead comes in, I give it to the agent, but I'm also putting things on Facebook and other
Yeah.
land websites, and I pay for drones out of pocket. I know a lot of realtors will pay for photography, but I have a drone guy that I love, and I think he does phenomenal work in one specific market. So it's like I'm not going to just settle for their photos because I think it's important to call out parcels and boundaries and nearest towns and stuff that
Yeah.
agents might not just do that, right? So I think to your point, how can we as investors be proactive about enhancing value in some capacity and not just buy it and then give it to someone else to sell?
Yeah, I really do think it's something that we're going to look more into because, and even on like future development projects, what can we do that's a little extra on the front end to make it more marketable? Because especially with land, like once you go to, you don't want to have stuff sitting for a year.
No,
That's when people just assume there's problems, right? So
right.
you really want to create a compelling product up front, if at all possible, if you want to move those properties at retail value and within a timely manner. Otherwise, you're just in the game. Like we're in this right now on a few properties where we're just like, all right, should we
Yeah,
reduce price again? It's been on market a
right,
freaking year now. Should we reduce price
right.
again? We have one property we funded for a guy out in Georgia, and the agent swore up and down this property. It was like a 6, 7 acre parcel, something like that. Really pretty near a lake, but it's not lake adjacent. And the agent was like, "This is a very tough community to buy land in." We had it under contract for 100 grand. She's like, "This will sell for 260, 270,000, no problem. Like these properties never come for
Wow.
sale. There's a huge appetite for them." I was like, "All right, we vetted her, we grilled her, we did all of her comp research. We definitely didn't have the same rosy picture that she did, but we were like pretty sure it was going to sell around 200 and it wouldn't take too long." Fast forward almost a year and a half, we have it currently listed at 135 grand, just at a break even effectively.
Wow.
And it's just rotting there. It's like,
Yeah,
what do we do? It's been on market how long now? And we've had offers, it just hasn't panned out. People have had financing fall through and stuff like that. But, I'm sitting here thinking like, all right, what if we cleared it? What if we ran the driveway in? What can we do
right.
to make this more presentable to at least get it moved? Because there's a cost of capital. We're losing money every time we hold it for a day,
So couple things that come to mind, Logan. One would be to like really grill the agent about who the target buyer is, like who they think the end user is and what is important to that end user. Like what amenities? Could it be a shed? Is it a road? What does that look, a well? Like what does that actually look like? The second is I think every investor needs to understand the seasonality of the land business in the markets that they're targeting. There's certain markets that I'm in that have 50% of their sales, 50, between Memorial Day and Labor Day, right?
yeah.
And I remember that when I used to do residential flips. It's like, you try to buy in December and January. Why? Because if someone's listing their house in those months, they tend to be motivated to sell, right? Those are
Yep.
terrible months to sell property. And, from like President's Day to Labor Day, well, in the summer it can get quiet. And then from, Labor Day to Thanksgiving, market's on fire, and then from Thanksgiving through Christmas, it's horrible, right?
Yep.
So the seasonality becomes really important, and just having something on the market to have it on the market might not be smart, right? Because then you see days on market and all that stuff. Maybe it's better to pull it and then list it right when things are going to get hot. I don't know. I mean, every market's different, you know.
Yep. Yep. Well, man, that's a lot of great info. You mentioned a couple services that you use. Any quick plugs? I know you mentioned land data. Is that correct? Landdata.com?
Landstats, no,
Landstats?
land/stats.com.
Okay.
It's great. Tim, the founder, is very, very accessible, great guy. Built it for land investors to understand markets better. I found that to be a great tool. I mean, we built our CRM from the ground up off a platform called Zoho, just because I
Okay.
wanted to have more customizable dashboards and track my KPIs. I was, using some other real estate CRMs, but I didn't find them to be as user friendly as that one. So yeah.
Okay. Sweet. Well, any wise words before we part ways? I think we're getting close to our time here.
I don't think I have a lot of wise words. I love learning from you all. Like I watch a lot of the podcasts, and and yeah, people feel free to reach out if anyone wants to connect. Joshua at smartlandinvestors.com. Pretty available and accessible. So grateful to be with you, Logan. Really enjoyed this conversation, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you for being on. And yeah, I'm excited. Tomorrow I'm recording with Peter Toth, and we're going to go deep dive into acquisition. So that's going to be a good one coming up as well. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure chatting with you, folks. If you
Mhm.
need land funding, go to landpartnerfunding.com. We'll help you with your development projects, your flips, whatever you might have, as long as we're not going vertical. And also, I've had an increase of people who are just landowners who are looking to maybe do some forced appreciation strategies on their properties and looking to partner with someone like myself. If that's your situation, go ahead and reach out to me at thelandfixer@gmail.com. Once again, Joshua, thank you for your time. And folks, we will see you on the next one. Cheers.
Thanks, Logan. Cheers.